Hey guys, tonight we journey to the wind-bitten fjords of the far north, to a place where lullabies rhyme with axe handles, and even the toys have splinters. Imagine the thick smell of peat smoke curling from a longhouse chimney, mingling with the faint aroma of boiled onions, wet wool, and unwashed ambition. The fire crackles low, the wind howls outside, and somewhere inside this warm, creaky timber hall, a Viking mother cradles her newborn against the hard edge of the 9th century. You probably won't survive this, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The baby in question? He's not special, not yet, just another shriveled pink bean wrapped in fur, wailing like it's his full-time job. His mother hums something low, a tune passed down from her own mother, about a troll who eats cowardly children and leaves behind their sandals. Comforting. This little bundle, squinting up at the flickering rafters, is born into a world that will demand sharp edges from the moment he takes his first sip of goat's milk. Not love, not tenderness, usefulness, strength, a clean kill if necessary. Around him, the longhouse buzzes softly. There's always someone sharpening something. Iron knives gleam beside dried fish. A shirtless uncle is dozing upright by the fire, one eye open. A grandmother mutters to herself while spinning flax, pausing only to cough like she's trying to exercise her lungs. The rhythm of life here is worn smooth by repetition, like a sword hilt passed down generations. And the baby's first days? They're more test than welcome. Viking parents had a brutal little tradition called exposure. You see, newborns weren't automatically accepted. After the midwife cleaned and swaddled them, the father, yes, the dad, would lift the child, look it over like a horse at market, and decide whether to raise it or leave it outside. On purpose. Historians still argue whether this practice was widespread or dramatized by Christian chroniclers who were trying to shade the Vikings extra dark, but there's enough archaeological whispering to suggest that, yeah, sometimes the baby didn't make the cut. Back in our longhouse, this one is lucky. A strong squawk, 10 good fingers, a grip like a squirrel with a secret. He's kept. The naming comes next, maybe 2 or 3 days later. Once the family feels confident the little guy won't cough himself into the next world. Names matter. You're not just picking something trendy, you're invoking legacy. If your Uncle Bjorn died gloriously by falling off a horse mid-battle while trying to impress a milkmaid, well, congrats, you now have a baby Bjorn. And the name comes with expectations, bravery, ferocity, and hopefully better balance. Inside the smoky hall, older children peer over from the shadows. Already they're judging the new arrival, another mouth to feed, another contender for their father's limited approval. The Viking households didn't run on gentle encouragement. They ran on comparison, on stories, on lessons drawn from the sagas. From the first cough, you're being watched, measured. Outside, the fjord sleeps, water black as iron, wind teasing the wooden hulls of docked longships. Inside, a warrior snores, a dog sighs, and the baby? Swaddled tightly, already expected to grow into a blade. No pressure, kid. By the time your eyes can track movement across the flickering hearth, your world is full of sharp objects and sharper expectations. Viking childhood doesn't come with colorful mobiles or soothing whale song playlists. No, you get toys that could double as weapons and lullabies that sound like weather warnings. You're not even speaking yet, and someone's probably handed you a carved wooden axe. It's not ceremonial, it's not cute, it's practice. In your chubby toddler hands, the weight of that little axe teaches you balance, grip, and, if your sister's goat wanders too close, problem solving. The adults nearby don't stop you if you swing it. They're too busy watching how you swing it. There's a quiet nod from your grandfather if you don't flinch when you smack it into the frozen ground and send up a puff of icy dirt. That's promise, they think. That's something we can work with. Viking toys were remarkably direct. Archaeologists have found tiny wooden swords, model longships, and even miniature shields. Less Fisher-Price and more Battle Prep Junior Edition. They weren't just playthings, they were orientation tools for your future in raiding, farming, or dying trying. If you were lucky, you got a tiny iron knife by age 4. Not to cut apples, apples are a luxury. To learn how not to cut your own fingers off. And then there were the stories. You don't get the sleepy kind where everyone lives happily ever after. No, your bedtime tales are full of frost giants and blood oaths. They warn you about trolls under bridges and ghosts that ride the wind, howling like lost warriors. Some stories are just clever excuses for moral lessons. Don't cry at night, your aunt might whisper, or the draugr will hear you. The draugr, by the way, is an undead Viking corpse with a grudge and a fondness for darkness. Sweet dreams. Still, you fall asleep to the rhythm of your mother's voice, low and steady. She's not trying to scare you, she's trying to shape you. These tales are her tools. She doesn't have much, maybe a loom, a pot of drying herbs, and a voice roughened by wind, but she uses them well. Some scholars suggest that Viking children heard these stories not just for fear, but for familiarity. By the time you're old enough to hold a real sword, those same names and monsters are old friends. You know the difference between a good death and a shameful one, between Odin's favor and Loki's tricks. Historians still debate whether these tales were told nightly or reserved for special gatherings, but whether they came from grandmother by the fire or father on his rare sober evenings, the impact was lasting. Every saga carved a groove into your mind, preparing you for a world that expected more of you than warmth and manners. And it wasn't all steel and shadows. Sometimes your toys included little wooden animals too. Cows, pigs, horses, because even a future raider needs to know how to herd sheep without accidentally throwing a spear at them. Sometimes you and your siblings played pretend. One of you would be the king, another the enemy, and the rest would take turns storming the turf mound outside your home like it was a fortress. The king rarely won. Inside, your parents listened to your games with half an ear. They're not ignoring you. They're judging whether you're showing the right instincts. Do you take orders? Do you give them? Do you protect your younger cousin or push him into the snow to win? One of those answers earns you stew. The other earns you silence. Even toys carried symbolism. A carved horse wasn't just cute. It told your family you were thinking about travel, movement, maybe command. A girl who played with miniature distaffs and herbs was already preparing to heal wounds, spin sailcloth and bind broken warriors. And don't think for a second girls were spared the sharp edges. Their toys had knives too, just more stitching needles and fewer broad axes. Aunt Geetha says playtime is where you practice the face you'll wear when you're cold, hungry, and staring down an angry Saxon. You think she's joking. She isn't. In your dreams, you hold a wooden shield. It's cracked. Splinters jut from the edge, but you love it because it was yours. And one day, it will be real. One day, that splintery grip will become a leather-wrapped hilt, and you'll remember the weight. And maybe, just maybe, you'll remember the lullaby about the troll who ate the coward's shoes. You're about 4 now, give or take a winter, and you've stopped falling over every time the wind shifts. That's progress. Your arms are stronger, your steps surer, and your understanding of the world still questionable. But your mother is already shaping you into someone who doesn't flinch, doesn't whimper, and definitely doesn't talk back to Aunt Geetha unless you want to eat salted fish heads for the next 3 days. Viking mothers aren't soft-spoken. They're not distant either. They're practical, efficient, fierce in the way a storm is fierce. Cold, unstoppable, and somehow necessary. Yours smells like smoke and wool and a hint of boiled turnips. She's up before you, every single morning, clattering pots and scraping out ashes from the hearth, while muttering something about lazy bones not rating themselves. Her love language is firm correction and deeply unsettling nursery rhymes. One of your favorites? The one about the girl who didn't obey her mother and was turned into a stump. Not metaphorically, literally a stump, with moss. You asked once if it was a joke. Your mother stared you down until even your thoughts apologized. Breakfast is a negotiation, usually some form of porridge, barley if you're lucky, a splash of goat's milk if the goats haven't gotten moody, and if the adults are in a good mood, maybe a crumb of honey, rare as gold and guarded like treasure. Mead is for later, but you've definitely seen your older cousins sneak sips when the grown-ups are too busy repairing the thatch. Occasionally children were given watered-down mead during feasts. It wasn't exactly forbidden. After all, water wasn't always safe, and fermented beverages had benefits. Not ideal for nap time, but sure, let's hand toddlers a splash of Viking IPA and see what happens. Historians still argue whether this was cultural norm or occasional indulgence, but it certainly explains why little Thorstein tried to fight the chicken coop last Yule. Your mother isn't just the one feeding and cleaning you. She's your first trainer. She teaches you to braid rope, twist wool, and identify edible plants, because if you wander off and eat the wrong mushroom, she doesn't want to have to bury you in the middle of dinner prep. She teaches you rules: never touch the sword rack, never speak Odin's name in vain, and never, ever wake Uncle Ulf unless something is literally on fire. Discipline is swift and uncomplicated: a glare, a smack, a suddenly withheld slice of fish pie. No long lectures. Vikings don't have time for deep emotional processing. Feelings are luxuries, like imported silk or winters without frostbite. If you're upset, go scream into a pine tree like everyone else. Still, there are warm moments, quiet, often strange ones. Your mother hums when she weaves. She braids your hair before festivals, tugging a little harder than necessary, but with a rhythm that means she cares. She once taught you a healing charm whispered over boiling herbs, something her grandmother swore by for earaches and nightmares. You never told anyone it worked, it just did. Viking mothers were also knowledge keepers. They held the clan's stories, recipes, spells, and secrets. Sometimes they knew more than the men did, and once in a while you'd see your mother glance toward the woods during a storm, mutter something about the old spirits, and toss salt into the hearth, just in case. Historians still debate how much of Viking domestic life was infused with this blend of folklore and practical survival. The lines between belief and habit were blurred. Was that chant a real warding spell, or just something to keep kids occupied while the stew simmered? No one's sure, but you remember it, and you hum it when you're cold and alone. Your chores grow with you. You're now responsible for carrying water, feeding chickens, and keeping your baby sibling from chewing on firewood again. Your mother checks your work with one eyebrow raised. If it's good, she nods. If it's not, you redo it. No praise, no gold stars, just the unspoken knowledge that doing your part is how the family survives. You hear her laugh sometimes, not often, usually when someone falls face first into the snow while trying to be impressive. It's the kind of laugh that sticks in your memory, low, rare, and worth chasing. And despite all the gruffness, despite the strictness and the stories that keep you up at night, you feel safe with her. In that longhouse full of noise and fire and steel, her presence is a kind of armor, the kind you don't realize you're wearing until the day she lets you walk alone to the neighbor's farmstead. Half a mile of wolves, frost, and the possibility of ghosts. She hands you a small knife and says, just in case. No hug, no goodbye, just trust, and you carry that heavier than any blade. By now, your legs are sturdy enough to carry you across the frozen yard without falling, and your fingers no longer fumble every time you're handed something vaguely sharp. Which is good, because your father just gave you a stick and told you to hit your cousin with it, not out of anger, out of tradition. Viking toddlers didn't have formal schools, but that didn't mean they weren't learning constantly. Everything was a lesson, especially when it hurt a little. Today's lesson? How to swing without hesitation, and how to take a hit without crying. It's all very educational. You face your cousin across the packed dirt yard. He grins like someone who has absolutely swung a stick at many small things before. You grip your branch with both hands. No one says go. No one tells you the rules. But you both understand them anyway. Don't fall, don't flinch, and if you bleed, try not to get it on the firewood. These mock duels were more than play. They were the beginning of your training, tucked into the rituals of daily life like onions in a stew. Necessary, a little bitter, and often tear-inducing. Through wrestling, chasing, and stick fighting, you learn the core skills a Viking child needs: speed, reflexes, pain tolerance, and a healthy respect for gravity. Your elders are watching, of course. They're always watching. Your father leans on his axe and offers no encouragement. If you win, he'll nod once. If you lose, he might tell you a story about a cousin who lost a real duel and had to grow potatoes in silence for the rest of his life. Motivation comes in many forms. Sometimes these fights happen spontaneously, after an insult or a disagreement over who gets the last boiled carrot. Other times they're organized, little duels with stakes, a crust of bread, a length of leather cord, a prized bone whistle carved by someone's uncle with too much time. Victory tastes like bragging rights. Defeat tastes like snow and regret. Historians still argue whether these mock battles were sanctioned by the adults or simply tolerated. Some sagas suggest children were deliberately encouraged to mimic adult warriors as preparation for eventual raids. Others hint that kids simply imitated what they saw, and in Viking society, what they saw was violence with a side of fish stew. You don't just learn combat through practice, you learn by watching, by listening. Your uncles trade stories of raids and brawls over salted meat. They show off scars and describe exactly how it feels to swing an axe into someone's shield and have the echo ring through your bones. You listen, wide-eyed, chewing on a piece of flatbread that tastes mostly of effort and smoke. Weapons training in its early forms starts small. You carve shapes into the dirt with a knife. Learning control. You balance smooth stones on your knuckles, learning stillness. You shadow spar with tree branches, testing angles and footwork. Occasionally, someone gives you real iron, just for a moment, just to see how your grip holds up under weight. It's heavier than you expect. Everything always is. And yet, not everything is violent. You're also taught to notice things. How snow settles in footprints, how crows gather before a storm, how the dog growls half a second before your brother throws a snowball. Awareness is its own kind of weapon. There's a game you love called Shadow Stalk. One child hides, the others hunt. The goal? Get close enough to tag your target without being seen. It's part hide and seek, part pre-raiding recon. The winner is usually the quietest, or the sneakiest, or the one who remembers to rub ash on their cheeks to blend into the dusk. Girls play too. Of course they do. Viking society expected strength from all sides. While boys learned the arc of a sword, girls learned the angles of a dagger. Your sister once accidentally tripped you during a race and stole your lunch. Your mother called it resourcefulness. Open rivalry was encouraged in small doses. If you were too friendly, someone might accuse you of being soft. If you were too cruel, someone might shove you face first into the snow. Balance was everything. And then there were the chants. Children's songs turned into battle drills. Repetitive rhythms to help with coordination, breathing, timing. One went something like, left hand, right hand, break the bone, strike the wood, claim your throne. It sounds adorable until you realize it was probably written by someone who once decapitated a rival chief with a spoon. Some evenings, if you trained especially well, or stopped crying faster than usual, you were rewarded with a story. Not the scary kind this time, one of the funny ones. Like the tale of the warrior who tried to ride a cow into battle because he was too drunk to find his horse. The cow ran directly into a tree. Nobody won. It's a bedtime classic. Your muscles ache. Your fingers are bruised, but you're getting stronger, faster, a little meaner maybe. And that stick in your hand? It's starting to feel like an extension of your arm. You don't say it out loud, but you like the feeling. You're older now, maybe 6, maybe 7, and you've officially become a menace. Not in the way modern toddlers might ruin a living room with finger paint, but in the way a Viking child starts to understand that life is a game of dominance, stealth, and occasionally hiding smoked fish in your brother's boots for revenge. Childhood games have shifted. No more wooden horses and shadow stalks just for fun. Now, you train through play, and the play is alarmingly tactical. You and the other children spend hours designing raids, not pretend raids on imaginary kingdoms, but real ones. Your targets? Chickens, goats, a rival longhouse's apple stash. One time, someone's laundry. The rules are simple. Don't get caught, and if you do, don't admit anything. Viking kids are experts at the wide-eyed innocent face. I don't know how the goat ended up on the roof. You whisper, while trying not to laugh. No one believes you, but no one has proof either. That's a win. Today's mission: sneak into your cousin's yard, steal one of his apples, and escape undetected. There's frost on the ground, the sky is gray as old iron, and your breath steams like dragon smoke. You belly crawl across the frozen turf, gripping a bag woven from scrap wool. You signal to your sister, 2 fingers, then a fist. That means go now in your made-up code. She nods and creates a distraction by toppling a stack of firewood near the pig pen. It's not elegant, but it's loud. While the grown-ups run to investigate, you dart forward, grab the apple, and tumble back behind a pile of logs. Your pulse races, your fingers are numb. You bite the apple, it's mealy and half-frozen. Victory. These missions are practice, not just for raiding, but for thinking fast, moving quiet, working as a team. Viking raids across Europe weren't just brute force, they were coordinated chaos. Your games mimic that chaos, scaled down and mostly goat-related. And while the adults pretend to disapprove, shaking heads, dramatic sighs, the occasional chore punishment, they're secretly pleased. A child who can steal a chicken without waking a dog is a child who might one day return from a raid with silver and stories. Historians still debate whether these childhood games were formally taught or simply mimicked from observation, but the consistency across sagas and archaeological sites, miniature tools, child-sized shields, coded gestures scratched into wood, suggests something more than coincidence. Viking children weren't just playing, they were rehearsing. Stealth wasn't the only lesson. You also practiced sabotage, like the time you and two friends stuffed dried nettles into the neighbor boy's cloak. He itched for days. When confronted, you apologized earnestly and offered a peace token, a carved button you totally didn't steal from his mother's basket. Manipulation was a skill too. Then came the mock trials. When two kids argued over whose turn it was to poke the fire with the iron rod, the group held a thing, a mini assembly like the adult ones where disputes were judged. A volunteer, usually the tallest kid, served as law speaker. You stood in the frost, gave your version of the story, and tried not to cry. The verdict? You lose. Your punishment? Hauling firewood. Brutal. But even that served a purpose. Viking society was heavily based on honor, law, and public negotiation. Teaching children how to argue their case, recognize a hierarchy, and handle shame early was just good sense. Emotional damage builds character, apparently. You also begin crafting your own gear. Nothing fancy, scraps of leather twisted into belts, bits of antler sharpened into hairpins or tools. One boy turns a broken spoon into a throwing knife. It doesn't fly far, but it sticks in the turf, and that's enough to make him a legend for a week. You try to replicate it with a stick and promptly whack yourself in the face. There's blood. No one offers help, but someone hands you a cloth. That's affection, Viking style. On cold evenings, you and your friends sit by the fire and draw raid plans in the ash with burnt sticks. You map out whose yard has the best turnips, who's most likely to have hidden smoked fish under their floorboards. You practice moving quietly, even when you're giggling. One girl teaches the rest of you how to breathe through your mouth in winter so your breath doesn't fog as easily. She's terrifying and brilliant. Sometimes an adult joins you, usually a bored uncle with no patience for weaving and too much meat in his system. He watches your game of ambush and escape, then casually suggests that hiding behind the pig trough is foolish if the wind's coming from the north. Always stay downwind, he says, before wandering off to belch near the fire. You remember that lesson for the rest of your life. These games don't feel like training. They feel like survival with a punchline, but your body is growing leaner, quicker, your senses sharper. You can climb a thatched roof in silence. You can duck under a swinging rope without losing your footing. You can sprint barefoot across icy mud and not even wince. You're not just a child anymore. You're a future raider in training. And your goat? Still missing. Probably on the roof again. The first snowfall settles like a hush over the village, blanketing the hills, smoothing out every rough edge except the ones inside you. Winter doesn't stop life here. It just slows it down, tightens it. The cold presses against the walls of your longhouse like a second skin, and the wind howls through the gaps in the thatch like an old spirit complaining about rheumatism. Inside, everything crackles, the fire, the dried meat, your joints after a day of hauling firewood through knee-deep snow. You sit by the hearth, knees pulled up, fingers raw from a poorly timed snowball, fight with your cousin that escalated into a full-on ice war. Aunt Geetha said it was spirited. Your bruised eyebrow disagrees, but tonight is special. Tonight is storytelling night. Your grandmother, the one with more wrinkles than your birch bark shoes, clears her throat. The fire dims, as if it knows what's coming. Everyone leans in. Even your loudest cousin goes quiet. This is sacred. The stories begin. Not the silly ones this time. Not the goat-riding warriors or the saga of the man who tried to court a bear. Tonight's tales are heavy. Shaped like axes, polished like shields. Grandmother tells you about Kara, a shield maiden who once rode into battle singing lullabies to her horse. She bled like a man, she says, but died with a smile like a Valkyrie. No one interrupts. No one asks why the lullaby mattered more than the war. You already know. The softness inside the savagery is the part that lasts. These firelit nights teach you more than a year of chores. The stories aren't just entertainment, they're blueprints. You learn about family honor, clan feuds, ancient oaths, and the quiet importance of finishing what you start, even if it's vengeance. Some nights, your father speaks. He tells of a raid gone sideways in the Hebrides, when his boat was stuck in a kelp trap and he had to paddle home with a goat as ballast. It sounds ridiculous, but you see the way his jaw tightens when he mentions the storm. You start to realize that every laugh hides something sharp. The long winters, harsh though they are when you learn how to endure boredom without unraveling. There's little daylight, little space, and even less privacy. The longhouse becomes a world unto itself. You sleep near the goats, eat next to the fire, and dream under blankets that smell like sheep and salt. Historians still debate just how communal Viking longhouses truly were. Some claim families carved out corners for themselves with low walls or curtains. Others believe it was full-blown communal chaos, with snoring, snacking, and snide remarks happening inches apart. Either way, you learned quickly not to say anything you wouldn't want repeated by sunrise. Winter teaches you patience. If you want warmth, you chop wood. If you want food, you churn butter, skin fish, or scrape the last scrap of meat from a knucklebone. Complaints are useless. The adults ignore them. The dogs judge you. Even the wind seems unimpressed. You make things to pass the time. You carve runes into wood scraps, hoping they bring luck. You twist cords from old threads, trying to make them strong enough to bind a chicken's leg. Don't ask. Your sister weaves tiny baskets for imaginary offerings to the gods, and you pretend not to be impressed by her detail work. Sometimes a skald visits, a traveling poet with bad teeth and excellent timing. He's paid in bread, warmth, and the privilege of not being asked to haul anything. He tells tales of distant lands, of kings and cowards, of lovers turned to stone and rivers that whisper secrets. His voice is rough, but rhythmic. You hang on every word. And then there are the games by firelight, quiet contests of riddles, finger tricks, or who can hold their hand in the snow longest without crying. One boy wins by pretending he's gone numb. You try to copy him, but your teeth betray you with a tiny whimper. He gets an extra slice of cheese. You get character development. There's also the smell, a permanent perfume of smoke, animal fur, pine tar, and whatever died outside but hasn't been discovered yet. You'd think it would be awful, but it becomes home. Comfort, like the scratch of wool against your neck or the faint buzz of fleas in the straw. Your dreams become different in winter, slower, heavier. You dream of wolves walking upright, of longboats gliding over frozen seas, of a warrior made entirely of crows who teaches you how to shout without sound. You wake up wondering if the story was yours or someone else's. You don't ask. The line between dreams and sagas is thin here, and every so often someone dies, quietly, without fanfare, the old or the sick. A candle is lit, a few words are said, and life moves on. Death is never the end, it's a door, and Viking children are raised to knock on it with confidence, if not a little mischief. So you grow stronger through stillness, sharper through repetition, and even when you're bored, especially then, you're being forged. Because winter isn't just about surviving, it's about remembering who you're meant to become. You are 10 now, double digits, old enough to tie your own cloak, mend a hole in your trousers, and row for hours without whining, at least not out loud. More importantly, old enough to be trusted on the water, which in Viking culture is roughly equivalent to being handed the keys to a dragon. Your first rowing lesson begins at dawn, not a romantic dawn with birdsong and soft sunlight. This one is damp, fog-choked, and smells like yesterday's fish stew. You scramble down the frost-covered slope to the waterline, heart pounding, boots slipping. A long, narrow boat rocks lazily against its mooring post like it's bored of waiting for you. This is no toy model. This is the real thing, a gnar, or perhaps a small longship, depending on your clan's wealth and ambitions. Either way, it has seen better days, cracked ribs, faded paint, barnacles like tiny battle scars. Still, it floats, and that's the only requirement. Your uncle grunts at you from behind a coil of rope. You row, you listen, you don't complain. That's the full safety briefing. You clamber aboard with 2 other boys and a girl named Ursa, who already has arms like braided rope. She sits across from you, rolls her eyes, and grabs an oar. You follow her lead, and then it begins. The sea doesn't care how small you are. The water heaves, and your stomach answers. Your oar dips too shallow, too deep. splashes the others. You adjust, again, until finally, miraculously, you find the rhythm. The creak of wood, the slap of water, the hiss of your breath. Together, it sounds like a lullaby for giants. You're part of the boat now, a living rib. Every stroke earns a nod, every blister a badge. Ursa grins once when you match her pace. You pretend not to notice. These boat drills are no idle exercise. They're vital. Viking culture was built on the sea, carried on planks and sails from fjords to far-off lands. By your age, you're expected to know how to row, steer, bail, and patch leaks with speed and silence. If you're lucky, you'll also learn to fish, which sounds peaceful, until you're elbow deep in cold water, trying to gut something that's still twitching. One afternoon, your father drops a slippery cod in your lap with a knife and walks away. You figure it out, eventually. You only cut yourself once. The fish dies with a look of betrayal. Historians still debate just how early Viking children joined raiding crews. Some sources hint that boys as young as 12 accompanied their fathers, at least as helpers or deckhands. Others argue that true participation didn't begin until the mid-teens, but training clearly started early. By 10, you're expected to hold your own on a boat. Not just row, but bail during storms, tie knots with cold, numbed fingers, and keep your wits when the sail whips loose like a dragon's tongue. When the sea is calm, your elders tell stories. Your uncle speaks of distant coasts, of monasteries lit like beacons and soft with gold. You don't understand all of it, why the monks didn't fight back, why the treasure mattered so much, but you hear the tone, that mix of awe and danger, and you feel the hunger it plants in your chest. Evenings are your favorite. After a long day on the water, when your arms feel like wet laundry and your face is crusted with salt, you sit around a driftwood fire and listen. The stories always end with a battle, a storm, or an embarrassing fall into the fjord. Your father's favorite? The time he sneezed mid-swing and nearly beheaded his own comrade. Nearly, he emphasizes, still won the fight. There's laughter, always laughter. Viking humor is like its mead, rough, sharp, and slightly fermented. You learn to laugh at pain, to joke about cold, to see absurdity in survival. It's part of the culture, a balm for the bruises. And then, as the fire crackles low, comes the bedtime story. One meant just for you. Your father tells of a warrior who lost his axe in battle, broke a rib, and still managed to scare off his enemies by howling like a bear while wielding a cooking pot. You laugh. He doesn't. You may lose your weapon, he says quietly, but never lose your courage. That night, you lie awake in the longhouse, muscles aching in places you didn't know existed. The sounds of sleep rise around you, snoring, shuffling, the faint squeak of rats staging their own midnight raid. You stare up at the rafters, counting the cracks, and imagine the sea beneath your feet. You dream of sails, wide and white, of shorelines hidden behind fog, of oars dipping in perfect rhythm, and somewhere in the background, your father's voice, telling you to keep rowing, because one day you won't just ride the boat, you'll lead it. You'd think Viking girls would be spared the blade, spared the bruises, the oar calluses, the fish guts under their nails. Your cousin Astrid, for example, once stitched a gash on her own knee without flinching, then went right back to chasing a pig that had escaped the pen. Your sister can outshoot half the boys with her slingshot and routinely wins wrestling matches by sheer cunning. And then there's Aunt Geetha. Aunt Geetha is what happens when you mix a healer, a gossip, a knife enthusiast, and a walking storm cloud. She smells like juniper and mutton. Her voice could strip bark off a tree. And when she tells you to sit still while she teaches you how to gut a fish, you do it, or risk learning the lesson through increasingly sharp metaphors. Girls in the Viking world didn't sit quietly in corners. They didn't wait to be rescued. They trained, they worked, and they learned the arts of survival with as much grit and sarcasm as their brothers. Your day might start with weaving, but it doesn't end until you've helped trap a rabbit or repainted a shield. The tasks start practical: mending clothes, fetching water, learning which herbs cure bellyaches and which ones accidentally make you see the gods. But Aunt Geitha believes every skill has two uses, one for daily life, one for defense. Never trust a man who's too clean, she says while sharpening a bone needle. He's hiding something, probably fear. You're not sure what she means, but you nod respectfully and pass her the thread. Historians still argue whether Viking women were formally trained for combat, or simply adapted as needed. While sagas glorify the few shield maidens, archaeological evidence suggests many women wielded weapons occasionally, especially in defense of home or kin. And while not every girl grew up swinging axes, nearly everyone knew how to use a knife, how to shoot a bow, and how to keep a secret. You watch as Geetha slices open a trout with unnerving precision, her hands moving like she's done this in her sleep. "Now you," she says, handing you the blade. The fish is slimy, the smell sharp and unrepentant, but your hands mimic hers, cut, scoop, scrape, rinse. She grunts in approval. "You'll do." Sometimes she tells stories while you work, not the grand epics, but the odd ones, like the time she fended off a drunken traveler with a ladle and a jar of pickled onions, or how her mother once pretended to be possessed by a house spirit to scare off a marriage proposal. "It worked," she says with a wink. "He married a sheep farmer instead." When she's not telling tales or gutting things, she's testing you. "Where do you stab a man if he's wearing armor?" You blink. The neck?" "Good, but also the back of the knee. Most men forget that spot." She taps your forehead. "Use your eyes, use your brain, and if you ever find yourself alone, remember, the shadows are friends if you don't squeak." You learn stealth from her too, not just how to move silently across creaky floorboards, but how to listen, really listen, to the shift of snow under a boot, the difference between a dog's lazy growl and its alert one, the rustle of someone trying not to be heard. In the evenings, when the chores are done and the longhouse hums with quiet, Geetha teaches you songs. Old ones, half sung, half spoken. Some are healing charms, some are riddles. One, she says, is a curse, but she won't tell you who it's for. You hum them under your breath when you're scared or bored or sharpening your own little blade by the hearth. You make your first knife from a broken spindle and a bit of iron wire. It's not elegant, but it cuts meat. And once, your cousin's hand, though that was technically an accident, still, Geetha calls it promising. She shows you how to hide it in your boot. Girls your age form quiet alliances. You practice braiding each other's hair while reciting saga lines backwards. You hide small treasures in tree hollows, feathers, shiny pebbles, a wax seal stolen from a trader's pack. You dare each other to sneak into the smithy and steal a coal without getting burned. You exchange knowing glances whenever the boys brag about their imaginary duels. One day, you and Ursa stage a pretend kidnapping, hiding a younger cousin behind the goat shed and demanding honey cakes for her release. Your aunt is livid. Your uncle laughs until he chokes. Geetha nods slowly and mutters, "Finally, some creativity." You're not raised to be sweet. You're raised to be capable, to stitch wounds and split wood, to poison a stew if absolutely necessary, to survive. And one afternoon, when Geetha hands you a tiny bag of dried herbs and tells you to keep it close, you don't ask what it's for. You just tuck it in your belt. You trust her, because Geetha doesn't raise children. She forges weapons. There comes a point in Viking childhood when friendship shifts from shared games and giggles to something a little more dangerous. Less about who can skip the most stones across the fjord, and more about who you'd want beside you when everything goes wrong. You're around 11 now, which in Viking terms means you're old enough to make mistakes that echo through the rest of your life. You meet your best friend in the middle of a snowball ambush. He throws first, square in the chest. You retaliate, slipping on the ice, nearly breaking your wrist in the process. He laughs so hard he forgets to duck your second throw, which hits him in the face and leaves a mark. Fair is fair. After that, you're inseparable. His name is Kettle, which you're told means kettle, but he insists it also means battle if you say it the right way. He lies constantly, but charmingly. You trust him with your plans, your secrets, and your worst jokes. He swears he once saw a sea serpent and that he's descended from a giant on his mother's side. You tell him you believe him. Mostly. Friendships among Viking children are not just social bonds. They're training grounds. Together, you and Kettle build shelters, trap birds, practice your war cries, which sound like angry seagulls at best, and create entire battle scenarios with sticks, mud, and alarming creativity. One day, you both prick your thumbs and smear them together over a flat stone. "Blood oath," he says solemnly. "We protect each other until the end." You agree, though neither of you are entirely sure what that end might be. You bury the stone near the goat pen. It's your secret. These childhood oaths sound romantic now, but they're rooted in real Viking traditions. blood oaths, handshakes, and verbal pledges carried weight. Loyalty wasn't just expected, it was enforced. To betray a sworn friend could bring shame worse than death. Some sagas even mention childhood pacts being honored into adulthood, influencing clan alliances and wartime decisions. Historians still debate how formal these blood bonds were. Were they recognized by elders? Did they carry legal weight? Or were they just over-enthusiastic children pretending to be chieftains? No one's quite sure. But in your world, it's real enough. Your bond with Cato deepens as the challenges get harder. When you're sent to hunt alone for the first time, he sneaks along to help. When he nearly falls through river ice, you haul him out by his collar, both of you wheezing from the shock. Later, you build a fire with shaky hands and warm yourselves with a stolen flask of elderberry wine someone forgot to hide properly. You cover for each other constantly. When Keto breaks a roof beam during a very ill-advised backflip attempt, you claim responsibility. When you fall asleep on guard duty and let the chickens escape, he says he saw a spirit and got distracted. No one believes him, but your mother is too superstitious to push further. Not every friendship is this deep. You also learn who to avoid. There's Eric the Spitter, who once licked your knife for a dare and hasn't blinked right since. There's Stig, who seems nice until you turn your back and find your shoes filled with goat dung. You keep your circle small, trust is earned, and when tensions rise, sometimes between families, friendships are tested. You and Kettle get caught in a feud over a stolen fishing net. Your fathers glare at each other across the village like wolves measuring bite strength. You and Kettle meet behind the grain shed and agree, nothing breaks the blood oath. Even if your families end up throwing axes over it, you'll stay loyal, for now. Not all pacts last forever. You learn that too. One winter, another friend breaks your trust. You shared a secret about the charm Geetha gave you, about a dream you had that made your skin crawl. He laughed, told the others, mocked you in front of everyone during dinner. Your face burns even thinking about it. That night, Kettle teaches you how to make a spit trap using pine resin and a bent branch. Not for revenge, he says, just lessons. The friend finds his boot stuck to a tree the next morning. No one says anything. You feel a tiny flicker of satisfaction, warm and quiet. You've learned the price of betrayal, a lesson you won't forget. Viking friendships aren't built on constant praise or soft hugs. They're built on scraped knees, shared bruises, and quiet nods when someone has your back. You don't say thank you. You offer the bigger half of your dried fish. You don't say sorry. You offer your knife and trust they won't cut you with it. You and Kettle dream together, of building your own longboat, of becoming legends in your own sagas, of stealing enough silver to coat your cloaks in coins. He swears he'll marry a Jotun and raise ice bears. You tell him you'll become king of somewhere warm. It all feels possible. You're not alone in this cold world. You've got a blood brother, and in this place, that's everything. By the time your voice begins to crack and your arms look less like twigs and more like tools, things start to shift again. People look at you differently, not quite an adult, but definitely not a child anymore. The freedom grows, but so does the expectation. You're old enough to make decisions, which also means you're old enough to be punished like you meant it. And, perhaps most perilously, you're old enough for your first real fight. It doesn't start the way the sagas describe, not in a field of honor, not with a shouted challenge or a clash of steel. It starts with stew, or rather, someone spilling yours. You've been chopping wood all morning, your fingers blistered and your stomach hollow. And just when you finally sit down, ready to inhale your bowl of salted lamb and barley, your cousin Hjalti bumps into you. Whether on purpose or not doesn't really matter. The stew is gone. Your hunger remains. And so do 20 pairs of eyes. Hjalti mutters something, maybe an apology, maybe an insult. You can't hear it over the ringing in your ears. You stand. So does he. It's on. The fight itself is clumsy, ugly. You both know how to throw a punch, but neither of you has quite mastered where to aim it. You end up wrestling in the dirt, rolling through goat droppings and gravel. You get in 2 solid hits. He lands one that bloodies your lip. Someone cheers. Someone else bets a chunk of honeycomb on who will win. And then, just as quickly as it began, it's over. Your uncle separates you with a snort. No lecture, no punishment. Just a sharp look, a nod, and a comment about how, at least you didn't bite each other this time. Congratulations. You've entered the age of reputation. Fighting among Viking teens wasn't just tolerated, it was a rite of passage. Not every scuffle turned into a blood feud. Most didn't even require adult intervention. They were social currency, a way to establish strength, defend pride, and signal maturity. And if you fought well, you gained respect, even from the person you just tackled. Later that night, Yalti throws you a scrap of dried meat and mutters, "You hit like a blacksmith's apprentice." You mutter back, "You fall like a sack of fish." That's friendship, Viking style. Historians still debate how structured these teen duels were. Some suggest they were ritualized, almost sport-like. Others describe them as spontaneous outbursts, resolved as quickly as they erupted. Either way, they served a purpose, showing your community that you could hold your ground. Literally, your parents don't coddle you after the fight. Your father raises an eyebrow, checks your knuckles, then says, "About time." Your mother hands you a warm cloth for your lip, but doesn't ask questions. Aunt Geetha just mutters, "Next time, lead with the elbow." You begin to notice other changes too. The way elders ask your opinion during chores. The way younger kids look at you like you're a hero, or a warning. You're given more responsibility. Watching the fire at night, helping manage trade with visitors, keeping an eye on the livestock when wolves howl a little too close. You even get to help with a burial, a quiet affair for an old fisherman who drifted off in his sleep. You help dig, you help sing, you help pack his grave with a fishing hook, a carved spoon, and a chunk of salted pork. Tools for the afterlife. It's your first real encounter with death that doesn't involve livestock. It lingers in your chest for days like smoke that won't quite clear, but it also sharpens you. You start training harder, practicing longer. Your wooden sword feels like a toy now. You ask for a real one, or at least a blunted blade. Your father doesn't say yes, he just hands you a whetstone and says, "Start learning how to keep it sharp." Your bond with Kettle shifts too. Less giggles, more plans. You talk about joining a real raid, about sailing south to see what foreign cities smell like. You whisper about girls, but only when you're sure no one else is listening. Ursa teases you both mercilessly, though secretly she sharpens your throwing knives when she thinks you're not looking. And then one day, a traveler arrives, a tall, leathery man with a crooked grin and a tunic stitched in patterns you've never seen. He brings spices and stories and a scar across his scalp like a lightning bolt. During supper, he tells of a duel he fought at sea, standing on the prow of a ship as it crashed against another, swinging a mace carved from whalebone. You ask what it felt like. He says, "Cold, loud, perfect." You can't sleep that night. You stare at the rafters, flex your hands, and imagine your first real fight. Not a scuffle, not a tumble in the mud, but a moment where you stand, weapon in hand, and make someone else step back. You know it's coming. You're not afraid. Well, not much. There's a smell in the air today. Pine smoke, crushed snow, and something older. It wraps around the longhouse like a shawl, clings to your clothes, slips beneath your fingernails. It's the smell of anticipation, of change. Today is your coming-of-age ritual. You're not told exactly what it will involve. That's part of the point. Viking rites of passage weren't meant to be easy, predictable affairs. They were surprises, challenges, sometimes public, sometimes private, but always unforgettable. And so you wake before dawn, dressed in your best, a tunic only mildly patched, boots that almost match, and a small charm looped around your neck, a smooth stone carved with runes. You don't know what they say. Geetha gave it to you with a look that dared you to ask. So you didn't. Your father is already up. He nods. Eat. It's a sparse meal. Dry bread, a slice of salted pork, and cold water. No honey, no mead. You chew slowly, wondering if you'll see another sunrise in this tunic. When you finish, he claps a hand on your shoulder and says, "Follow." You pass through the quiet village. Others are watching, pretending not to watch. Your sister gives you a quick smirk. Ketel flashes a thumbs up. Ursa whispers something that might be, "Don't fall in a hole," which is both unhelpful and extremely possible. You walk to the edge of the woods. There, the elders wait, cloaked, silent, bearded like winter itself. One holds a bundle, another carries a horn. The third hands you a stick and says, "Walk until you see the stones. Then wait." So you walk, through frost-tipped underbrush, past the old pine with the crow's nest, past the frozen stream where you once dared Kettle to fish with his bare hands. Your breath fogs, or your fingers sting. The stick in your hand feels strangely alive, like it's judging your grip. Then you see them, 3 stones, tall and weather-worn, forming a crude triangle. You step into their center and wait. The silence is vast, heavy. You hear everything: your breath, the creak of snow beneath your boots, the quiet hum of wind in the branches. Time stretches. A bird flaps overhead. Somewhere nearby, a fox barks once and falls silent. Then, a whisper behind you. You spin. No one. But something's changed. You notice a small leather pouch tied to the middle stone. You untie it. Inside, flint, a strip of dried meat, and a rune etched into bone. This is your test. Survive the night. You gather branches, build a small fire with trembling hands. It takes time, more than you'd like. You curse under your breath when the spark refuses to catch. Finally, blessedly, the flame blooms, small but defiant. You chew the meat slowly, eyes scanning the shadows. It tastes like dust and salt and preparation. And then you wait again. Sleep comes in bursts. You doze, startled awake by the crack of branches, the groan of wind, the whisper of something just beyond sight. Each time you wake, the fire is lower, and you feed it with trembling fingers. You think of the stories, of the boy who fell asleep and was taken by the spirits, of the girl who carved her name into stone and returned with eyes like frost. Historians still puzzle over the exact nature of Viking coming-of-age rituals. Were they survival-based, spiritual, symbolic? Likely, all three. They varied by region, by clan, by the weather and the whims of the gods. But what mattered was this: you proved you could be alone, cold, hungry, brave, and just when your fire begins to die, the sun cracks the horizon. You made it. You return with ash in your hair, soot on your cheeks, and smoke in your breath. The elders wait. They don't smile. They nod. One places a hand on your shoulder. Another ties a strip of wool around your wrist, dyed with bloodroot and iron. It marks you. You are no longer a child. The rest of the day is strange. Familiar tasks feel lighter. People speak to you differently. Your mother doesn't ask where you've been. She just hands you bread. Ketil punches your arm and says, "Took you long enough." Ursa eyes the rune you brought back and nods, impressed. That night, there's a small feast. Meat, mead, music. The skald sings a saga about a bear who fell in love with a thundercloud. Everyone laughs at the ending. You sit by the fire, feeling taller. Not just older, more real. Later, Geetha takes you aside. She presses a bundle into your hand. Inside, herbs, a small carved bone with your initials, and a new knife. "You'll need it," she says. "Life only gets harder from here." You look at her. She grins. "Good." And just like that, the child you were is gone. What's left is something sharper. The days blur after your rite. Wood chopping, fishing lines, new scars. You still laugh with cattle, still sneak honey cakes when no one's looking, but something has shifted behind your eyes. There's an edge now, a sliver of awareness that wasn't there before. You've been tested, and whether or not you pass in the god's eyes, the village treats you like you did. The adults speak more openly around you. The sagas are no longer just stories, they're instructions. Warnings. You start to recognize their patterns, the rhythm of choices and consequences, the way every hero's glory comes paired with a loss. No one gets to be great for free. You've begun to notice the ghosts too. Not the floating kind. No, Vikings didn't waste fear on that. These are quieter. The ghost of the boy who didn't come back from his winter trial. The girl who disappeared after a failed blood feud. The man who went berserk one day and never stopped screaming. No one talks about them directly, but they linger in silences. In the way people pause before telling certain tales. In the way your father stares into the fire when he thinks no one's watching. Ruthlessness, you learn, isn't about bloodlust or blind anger. It's about detachment, the ability to do what needs doing even when it hurts. To swing the axe because someone must, even if it's your friend. To hold your face still when you find your brother's tunic caught on a wolf's claw. You're not there yet, but you feel it forming. You test it slowly. A dog bites your hand, you don't cry. A neighbor's boy calls your mother a hag, you break his nose. When your sister slips on ice and cuts her cheek, you stitch it with thread you boiled yourself. She barely winces. You both pretend it never happened. You find yourself watching the older warriors, how they move, how they speak without wasting words. One leans against a wall during a dispute and settles it with a look. Another trains in the frost at dawn, bare-chested and humming like death is just a tune to keep time. You want that, not just the strength but the stillness underneath it. You start practicing alone, not for others, not to impress, just to feel what it's like to move quietly with a blade. You trace runes into frost on fence posts. You whisper your ancestors' names under your breath as you row. You catch a bird once, a crow with a twisted wing, and feed it every morning until it flies again. You don't tell anyone. Some parts of you keep hidden. Then comes the news. Your first real raid is being planned. Just a small one, nearby. Nothing like the southern expeditions. A chance to prove yourself. Your father doesn't ask. He simply sharpens your knife and checks your boots. Ketil is giddy. Ursa has already packed. The night before you can't sleep. Not from fear. From knowing this is the moment the stories begin. You lie awake listening to the wind through the thatch, the creak of rope, the whistle of some lost god. And you realize something. You're ready, or close enough. You rise quietly, walk outside, and breathe in the freezing dark. The stars flicker like distant campfires. You think about the journey ahead, not just across the water, but into the part of yourself that you don't know yet. The part that swings the axe without flinching. The part that sings the old songs with eyes wide open. The part that knows you were raised for this, not just to survive, but to shape the world. And now, the fire's dim, the blades are sheathed, the longhouse creaks softly as the frost settles in the eaves. You've walked through a world of cold winds and quiet strength, through stories carved in bone and whispered across snowy fields. Maybe your breath still hangs in the air. Maybe your hands still remember the weight of the oar, the knife, the pact made in pine. But for now, you can rest. The battles are distant. The voices fade. The stars turn slowly above your head, like ancient watchers who've seen every journey, every fire, every dream wrapped in wool and silence. You've made it this far. You're safe. Close your eyes. Let the cold drift away. Let the longhouse settle. Let your heart beat slow like waves against the hull. And sleep, little raider. Sleep.